Hello loves, and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be giving a summary of the worst books that I read in 2023. Now keep in mind that reading and books are a subjective experience. Just because I consider them to be the worst that I read doesn't mean there won't be something on here that you liked and enjoyed. So these are just my thoughts and my experiences with these books. I'm going to be going through any book that I gave a 2.25 or lower, and I will go in descending order of 2.25 to my 1 stars. So first 2.25 star book that I read was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Cold Blood is the story of a family who was murdered in their home after a break-in, and it is a true story of this crime. But the way the Truman Capote has written the book follows more similarly to how like a crime thriller would be written. But I use the word thriller lightly because I just wasn't that absorbed in this story, which I feel terrible about, being that this is a real person's experience. There were real deaths that happened here. The true crime that tends to be really popular nowadays is just so much more intense and visceral than what I found this story to be. And I found it so funny that I was reading the reviews afterwards, and all of them were like older people being like, I read this in high school and I had nightmares, and this is the kind of stuff that I listen to fall asleep. So I might just be desensitized to violence, and I do feel bad giving a low rating to something that is about the worst day of a family's life, but I just didn't find this lived up to the expectation I had of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Next 2.25 star is Kill Them All by Pasha Mala. This book is about a man who is offered money to stay in a mall for a prolonged period of time. It's been a while since I read it, so I can't remember exactly how long it was. And he essentially is forced to live in this mall, and spooky, creepy things happen, but not enough spooky, creepy things. I was sold a spooky, creepy horror, and I didn't find that it paid off in any way. I honestly struggle to even remember what the concept of this book was. It was very forgettable, so Kill Them All just wasn't that good in my opinion. Unpopular opinion, also on my 2.25 stars, Fourth Wing, which honestly is a generous 2.25. I had 2 different book clubs pick this the same month, so I read this as an audiobook, and oh boy, when I picked up Fourth Wing, if you went on Goodreads, it was labeled as an adult book. So I was expecting an adult level of writing. I think if you go now, last time I checked, it's now new adult, which is a bit younger of an audience that it's aimed to. And I would even argue it's written as YA, but with 19-year-old characters so they can fuck. You could see that there was an attempt at world building, but it wasn't built out in the text in a way that felt natural. It was the character in moments of stress just dumping lore on you. That was her quirk. And while I think that is a fun quirk for a main character to have, if that is the only method you have of dropping all of the lore that you are building your story on top of, it gets really repetitive, and it ends up being really hard to follow a third-person narrative where your knowledge of the world is restricted to that of one character. I didn't think the romance was built up enough. I don't know how they went from wanting to kill to wanting to have sex with each other that quickly. No build up from an enemies to lovers, and I don't think this is deserving of the hype that it got. I don't think it would have gotten the hype it got if it didn't have the pretty sprayed edges. Yeah. Next 2.25 is The Stand by Stephen King. This audiobook is 48 hours long. I had to listen to at least 2 hours a day for 21 days straight to finish this. And I don't think it was worth it. I thought that the concept started so strong, especially in 2023. Stories about pandemics, very interesting, having now lived through one, but I found it really hard to follow which characters were which because I thought some of them were written too similarly for me to distinguish who they were. It was not worth the time investment I put into it. I think the end was too ambiguous for the amount of time I invested in it. If you're taking 48 hours to tell a story, I expect that story to have been fully told. So, The Stand, not for me. There are some Stephen King that I do enjoy, but he is usually hit or miss for me, and this one was a miss. The next 2.25 star on my list is Strange Secrets of the Loch Ness Monster. I found this in the basement of a used bookstore, and when I looked it up on Goodreads, it had 10 ratings. That was it. When I looked it up on Storygraph, there was no record for it. So I thought, maybe I'm finding myself a true hidden gem. It was not a hidden gem. It is just, this person on this date thinks they saw that, and then this person on that date thinks they saw this, and then they tried to do this, and nautical miles, and the weather temperature, and just, whoo boy, this was not a well put together narrative of the story of a cryptid. It was a string of unrelated sightings that had no consistency as to what they even saw. So I will be on-hauling this, as I mentioned in my on-haul video. At least I bought it used and didn't waste too much money on it. Next is Crash by J.G. Ballard. This is a book about a man who figures out after a car crash that he is sexually aroused by blood, guts, gore, and car crashes. And I hated how this book was written. I read horror all the time. Blood, guts, and gore do not bother me, but there were other fluids that were mentioned often in this book and just made my skin crawl every time. It was so gross to read, and I have seen the movie and I remember liking that, but I feel like the difference between seeing it on a screen and reading the character's perspective and description of it, not something I would want to read again. So 2.25. Next is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. This is a classic about a man who, I think he's at a dinner party and he brags about finding a time machine, and then they actually go and explore the time machine. And while it's a classic, and so it very much is probably the founding text for a lot of things that came after, I just think that things that have come after have told it better. So I wasn't that interested in the story. I didn't find it to be that grabbing. So 2.25 for The Time Machine. And the last book that I gave 2.25, Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. This is a retelling of, I believe, the Iliad, but from the perspective of the female characters. And I found that this one slut-shamed Helen of Troy so much. What are we doing? Like, I know there are certain retellings where she is said to have gone willingly, but we don't have to have Penelope calling her basically a whore, especially when this is arguably supposed to be a feminist retelling of this story. So there was some bits that I liked. There was like these songs told by the slave women, I think. I enjoyed those bits. But also, they felt really out of place compared to the rest of the narrative. So, Margaret Atwood gets a 2.25 for me for that one. Moving on to the books that I gave 2 stars to. First is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I had heard so much hype about this. I think this is one of those book talk darlings. And unfortunately, I also heard what the plot twist is in this one. But I thought it had so much hype that even knowing that, I'd still enjoy the story, but God, was the character insufferable. Hated the characters, already knew the plot twist, and didn't really feel that the narrative building up to that was at par or very good knowing what the plot twist was. So the rereadability value of it, knowing the plot twist already, 0. So I gave that one a 2-star. Next is The Lake of the Dead. It is originally written by Andre Berkey, but I read a translated version. This is a cabin in the woods mystery where this group of friends are telling a story about a man who murdered his sister in this cabin in the woods, and then they all decide to go up to that cabin for the weekend. And this book was written in 1940, and this book was kind of really sexist, and I don't think that the mystery was that intriguing to justify reading through the misogyny. Yeah, I also saw the plot twist coming, like, almost immediately, so it was a bit of a waste for me, because why did I spend that time reading it if I already knew it was gonna happen? Next 2-star is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. This is actually a play, so I read the script for it, and this is the 2 characters from Hamlet, Hamlet's friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and it's kind of their adventures on this as side characters in Hamlet, and them kind of realizing they're part of a play. I think that maybe if I saw this as a play, I might enjoy it, but I just found it not that enjoyable to read. So maybe if I have the opportunity to see this as a play, I'd go see it, but I didn't particularly have a fun time reading it. So 2 stars from me. Moving on to 1.75 stars, we have 2 books here. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I had seen a YouTube video refer to this as the bloodiest book ever written, and I'm like, I am in. Bloodiest book? Let's go. Whew. And then I did place it on hold before Cormac McCarthy had passed, and only got to read it afterwards. Whew. It was bloody. Bloodiest? I've read a lot of horror. I would not consider this to be the bloodiest book I've ever read. I understand that the lack of punctuation has some kind of deep meaning that I'm sure literary scholars have written dozens of essays on. But as a reader, that experience was terrible. I had no idea who was speaking half the time. Was it even a different person speaking or the same person repeating themselves? I don't know, because there wasn't proper punctuation. And again, I'm sure that has some kind of literary importance, but as a reader, trying to enjoy my experience, I couldn't do it. I almost DNF'd this, but it was sold to me as the bloodiest book ever written. I was gonna finish it. I honestly should have known that I was gonna hate it because it's set in the Wild West. And as someone who studied film, there are 2 genres that I hate. It's the French New Wave and Westerns. So I should have known going in I wasn't gonna like this, and I didn't like it. It made me uncomfortable. I get that it's based on historical, real things, that they were removing the scalps from the indigenous peoples of those areas, but I didn't enjoy the experience of reading this. And maybe I shouldn't enjoy it, but I didn't enjoy it, nor did I get the point. So Blood Meridian, 1.75 stars. The other book that I gave 1.75 was The Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. Nailed it in 1 by Eva Jersky? By Eva. So this book is about someone who works in a Department of Rare Books and Special Collections, and one of these books that they're going to have this entire party about goes missing. Who took the book? Where did it go? And I felt like this is the kind of book that the mystery of it is so mundane that you have to bring it with the characters to keep the interest there. And the characters were not it for me. Didn't enjoy any of them, didn't like any of them, and therefore the mystery was kind of boring. Ooh, a book went missing. Ooh, it's a rare book. It's really expensive. Okay, and why am I supposed to care? I don't care about the person whose job is gonna be gone because they lost the book. So why should I care that the book went missing? Gave it a 1.75. And I didn't give any 1.5s. I didn't give any 1.25s. and I gave one actual book a 1-star review this year. So drum roll, the worst book I read this year, Why Grizzly Bears Don't Wear Underpants by Matthew Ingham, or aka The Oatmeal. Earlier this year, I was doing Escape the Readathon, where the results of the readathon were very much based on the number of books that you read. So I read this book and quite a few other The Oatmeal books, basically back to back, and this one was by far the worst. I hated this book. It was terrible. The humor of it was very much like 2010 internet, which if you get it, you get it. It did not age well, we'll put it that way. So that was the absolute worst book I read this year. So those are the worst books that I read in 2023. Luckily, there weren't that many of them when you consider that I have read over 350 books this year. And I hope that all of you have had a good reading year with not too many worst books. But if you want to leave a comment down below with the worst book that you've read this year, please do so. Also hit like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!